Now I'm very happy to welcome back a man who is a big part of the NFL betting market and one hell of a pool player, Mr. Adam Chernoff from the Simple Handicap at Covers.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Adam Chernoff. Adam, thanks for coming back on the show, and congratulations on going 5-0 on Sunday.
I'll take it. I'll take the Monday night win as well. It was much needed after week 1 and 2, which I think felt worse than they were, but it was good to get on the right side of things for sure.
Oh, certainly, man. And it was an interesting, definitely an interesting weekend. NFL, some tricky spots I fell into. One of my losses was Washington, which I thought that, I thought they had a shot. I mean, it was a good spot for them, and they couldn't catch them. And San Francisco kind of shit the bed with a very rusty Jimmy G that night.
Kind of being generous.
Very, very generous, man. But that's how it went. Otherwise, it was a pretty good day for me. But coming into week 4, it's so interesting. I mean, what we are seeing here, Adam, is cluster injuries galore, man. Didn't something just come out on Jonathan Taylor?
Yeah, toe injury kept him out of practice today. I've seldom struggled like I've struggled this week with injuries. For my count, and this changes seemingly every 10 minutes, 25 of the 32 teams have what I would deem as meaningful injuries. And the problem is that outside of Mac Jones, I don't know if any of them are cluster injuries that like we're certain about or can lean one way or the other. Like what gets me this week is it's a lot of unknowns. And so volume has been very, very low because I've ended up in a situation where I've wanted to bet a lot of things, but the injuries have kept me from doing much whatsoever.
Yeah, me too. I think I made my some early plays on Sunday, and then the injury stuff stopped everything. And so I think this is the type of week for contests, especially where you wait till the very last minute and just find out exactly.
Well, honestly, yeah. I mean, we can see a lot of things change by Friday afternoon at this time. And what I'm noticing too that's giving me some trouble is usually stuff tends to be, for the most part, priced in prior to the announcement. Like a good example last week with Justin Herbert was a miss. But there's been a couple different things in the last few weeks this regular season, but in the preseason where the line movement hasn't matched up with where the injury reports are trending. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of like late reactionary stuff that is hard to sort of discern between what's actually priced in and isn't. And so, I mean, there's so many things this week. The Zach Wilson news barely moved it. That was something I didn't anticipate being as priced in as it was. It's a weird week all the way around.
Yeah, very weird. And just going through the nuances of it, it's very hard for me to assign value this early in the season in these situations too. So I guess we're going to have to kind of go one by one and just kind of see where we go.
Yep.
And it's Wednesday right now. And, there's probably going to be a few leans from us, hopefully some better information as the week comes. But I do want to ask you a question that's, I've been thinking about the last 2 weeks, really. And it's about totals, Adam. It's kind of funny because I think the whole preseason narrative was that the refs are being asked to focus on illegal contact. So people assumed that totals would go higher, not saying you or anybody, any names. I'm just saying kind of the market in general.
You can say names. It's okay. I don't mind that.
I don't even remember if I did, to be honest with you. But more importantly, it's funny that these totals are down so much, even though people thought the illegal contact would bring them up. What are your thoughts on how that all worked out so far this year?
I think the miss on the illegal contact side of things was that as it was, even with a substantial uptick, it was the least called penalty of all the just 12 or 13 that were on a list. It was so insignificant that it probably, if it tripled or quadrupled or went up by an insane rate, probably wasn't going to be super impactful as is. What we're seeing so far through the first 3 weeks is the highest rate of zone coverage on a team-by-team basis that we've seen in, I believe it's ever. There was a timestamp on something from an article I read that dated it back. But essentially what this is leading to is relatively inefficient passing, a lot more variance with passing when you get into the red zone, and teams not quite being able to figure out the run game. It's like the defensive shift has caught a lot of offenses off guard, and there's now this kind of adjustment to try figure it out. And we're seeing scoring at a 20-year low through the first 3 weeks in the NFL. So when we think about 2020, we were at nearly 50 points a game. Last year, that dipped to 47.5, and this year we're below 44. And so there's changes. But what I would say on top of that work that's been done is inside of the red zone this year, specifically inside the 10, games that I have watched have had more ridiculous drive-ending decisions, drive-ending plays. There's been so much variance inside the red zone, which is always a high point for that. But this year, to me, the stuff that's been going on inside the 10 at the end of drives has been incredibly random, more so than any year that I remember watching the start. And it's always unpredictable, but there's been so many weird plays and drives that end at the goal line that's leading into some of this too.
Yeah, maybe it's that lack of prep in the preseason leading to this bad red zone efficiency situation, Adam. I would have expected that weather would have been a deterrent here to points, but I don't remember a lot of weather games the first 3 weeks either. It's just it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's the defensive shift more than anything. I guess weather games we saw the Niners playing week 1 and 1 that was pretty significant. The Seahawks in week 2 that was over on the West Coast in San Fran. Other than that, hasn't been a lot. This week, there's some disruption by weather, but I don't know what that's going to carry over onto Sunday. Doesn't look like a whole lot.
No, not right now. And obviously, we're thinking about everybody in Florida right now. Hopefully, the hurricane is not as bad as what's predicted, and everybody stays safe. So before we get into the slate of games, I do have a question on the Patriots here. This was a pretty big adjustment in a way. I'll admit I was fortunate enough to get the Packers early on Sunday at 8.5, and then now it went past the 10. And I have to kind of wonder how much I'm supposed to be going down from Mac Jones to Brian Hoyer, the destroyer, coming on into this game. I mean, it almost seems like I could see backdoor possibilities. I'm glad I'm on the side of the line movement, but at what point do I consider a buyback?
Okay, do we want to go Hoyer specifically, just neutral field, or do we want to go matchup specific? Because they're kind of two different things here. So which one do you want to tackle?
Let's talk about Hoyer in Green Bay, because that's where it is. And so let's just go by the exact adjustment from Mac Jones down to him, and then you can touch on the matchup afterwards.
All right. I'll throw it at you. Do you think that the Pats with Hoyer are better or worse than the Chicago Bears?
Better.
So there's the reason for the movement, because the Packers closed 10.5 against the Bears Sunday Night Football week 2. This line got up to 11 with the Pats and Hoyer. Majority was 10.5, but there was peak of 11. That's the disagreement. Part of it too is the total is so short at 40.5, and the Packers are playing unbelievably slow relative to the offensive talent that they are perceived to have. And so you have a home team playing incredibly slow as a huge favorite that has a priority on running the football while they figure out things with their receivers, matched up against a Patriots team that is being priced worse than the Chicago Bears were 2 weeks ago. That's really the full extent of it.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, and I think the market's kind of coming back a little bit based upon what you said there. So that makes total sense. Slow play, low total, that always screams dog. And so I could see this coming back down to a 10 for sure, at least later this week. The question is, what's the generic number between, I guess, a Mac Jones to a Hoyer? I would say 4.5 points. Would I be off 4.5, 5 points?
I touch lower. I'd be at 3.5 to 4 on a neutral against an average team. And so I don't. You're not far off with that guess.
Okay, good enough. Let's get into the NFL slate of games then, Adam. And we get a great game coming out for Thursday night football. It's the Miami Dolphins versus the Cincinnati Bengals. We have a spread of -4 here, and I'll get to sharing my screen for the situation here. Looking at the DraftKings total at 47. You know, you would think that maybe this total would have been higher had these unders not been so hammered between these two types of teams. But, you know, last week I had a 52 on the over for Buffalo, and that thing closed about 55, and that thing didn't even happen. Wasn't even close, really. Now, I missed this line, Adam. I saw Cincinnati was 2.5 for a little while on Sunday, then 3, and I missed out on this one myself. I guess I kind of blame myself for the fact that I'm always a little bit more careful when it comes to Thursday night football games, and it requires a little extra thought on my behalf. But now you're sitting at a 4 here, and to be honest with you, my power ratings are actually higher on Miami, and I don't use power ratings as much as the season goes. I more go towards an algorithm type approach. But I think this is a fair line right now, personally. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, so as we go through these, for the really obvious stuff, I think we should just identify it and then maybe find reasons to disagree, because it's a tough week, and I think there's interesting talking points on each. So the reason that this line has gone the direction it has, which is one-way money on Cincinnati, is because of a couple things. First, the Dolphins week, which is a short week, was completely disrupted by the hurricane. So they missed a full day of practice. They had to travel in a different routine. They had to go a day early. The whole week for them is a mess. That's one. Two, which we've probably heard by now, a number of different spots. The Dolphins were on the field for 90 plays in 100-degree heat against the Buffalo Bills in a massive division game. I think maybe more telling on top of that is the fact that not only was it a massive game against Buffalo, but the week prior, a huge amount of effort, energy, emotion, whatever you want to call it, spent in that comeback against Baltimore. And so you kind of have this Dolphins team at a peak. Everyone wants to bet on this offense, but they have two just brutal games back to back. And now this situation of travel on the short week is tough. To me, where I would say it gets interesting is the Tua injury, number one. This will be a recurring theme. We have no idea if he's playing or not, or what the state of his health is. We might see Teddy Bridgewater, in which case this would go to 7. What I think is the interesting thing to look at here is people are jumping all over the Bengals, and I get it. But how good is this Bengals defense? Because the one thing I'm not hearing a lot this week is the Bengals defense so far this season played Mitch Trubisky, making his first ever start for the Steelers. They played Cooper Rush, making his first start for the Dallas Cowboys. And then they played Joe Flacco as a stand-in against the New York Jets. So this was the Bengals defense that nobody was relatively high on coming into the season. They're now in the top 10 for a lot of different categories. They've played nobody. They haven't looked particularly great in those games as is. And now they're playing the Dolphins offense, which is top in the league through 3 weeks, validated by decent competition on the other side. To me, that's the interesting point here. The big kicker is it Tua or not? And if it's Bridgewater, can this Bengals defense still hold up? So that, to me, is an interesting spot. I personally, depending what this total does and who we get at quarterback, kind of looking over in general, but I haven't bet anything.
All right, no, fair enough. And it's interesting, all the, like you said, publicity that the whole Tua situation being wobbled and thrown back into the game. I mean, I was ready to tear my ticket up on Miami last week, and I knew I couldn't hedge because it was already factored in that he was probably not going to come back in live-wise. And I was like, oh, I can't believe he's back. I'm like, okay. So they're facing a lot of flack for that. But if he was good enough to get back into that game, I think it'd be worse almost for publicity-wise for him to be out this one. It's like almost like they have to kind of stand for what they did. So I expect Tua to play this game, and I think this might be a touch too high. I'm not sure if I'm going to get involved because the spot for Miami is horrible, and they have a nice 3-0 start and a big game coming up the following week.
Let me ask you this: if the line was 5, do you take Miami?
No, not right now.
Okay, if we knew Tua was going to play and the line was 5, would you take Miami?
I probably would, at least for a personal play, probably.
If the line was 3 and we knew Tua was going to play, would you still take Miami or would you take Cincinnati?
Probably Cincinnati.
So the line's probably right at 4.
I think it's right at 4. That's a great way to put it. It is correct at 4. Well, now the NFL is going to London, and you choose the old Jacksonville heading this out. But
where are the Jags playing?
I'm seeing all these stats too on Twitter of taking out the Jags. Favorites are 18-3, and it's just fun to watch right now. But you got the Vikings, very, very Jekyll and Hyde in different situations with Kirk Cousins out of his element at home against the Saints team that's a little bit banged up at receiver. I don't know if it's to the point where they have a cluster injuries at receiver, but right now it's looking a little dangerous for Michael Thomas and Landry and probably a few others. Their tight end Taysom Hill is also questionable, I believe. Adam,
this game's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. But here's the thing: should we wake up on the Pacific time at 7 a.m. to watch this game, or what do you think's going to come through for this? For this line? And to be honest with you, it's probably a pass for me right now, unless I know more about the Saints. It's sitting at 3 juice to the Vikings. You could have got a better number if you liked the Vikings before, but I'm not really one to run to the window, Brett, laying away from home, not necessarily road, but away from home chalk with Kirk Cousins.
So it's officially on the injury report: Jameis, Thomas, Landry, Hill, Kamara, Ramczyk, and Pete. So what is that? 8 offensive starters, all uncertain. Now, I get the impression the majority of them will play versus not playing, but Jameis doesn't look right at all. He's dealing with multiple fractures in his back. Like, here's a starting quarterback in the NFL that's playing with a broken back. It doesn't make sense. Outside of the Bucks' fourth quarter and the Falcons' fourth quarter, the other games that the Saints have played, they've done nothing on offense. The majority of their scoring has come in those 2 fourth quarters. The other, it's been awful. And so you wonder how much of that is injury related, how much of that is the absence of Sean Payton, and now Carmichael not being able to sort of carry over that game planning week to week, because it's all been slow starts. And when it's slow starts, it's more so on the coach and the OC and the game plan than it is on the team itself. But this number went up because of the injury situation for the Saints. Now, what's interesting was, again, we go back to what is priced in and what is not. This was sort of like none of these guys being on the injury report are necessarily a surprise. And on Monday morning, there was a comment that it's very likely that Thomas is going to be able to go. And so this line, despite Minnesota being considerably healthier, it never took money on Monday, never took money on Tuesday. It was only today as the injury report came out. And what happened was the Saints have already gone to London. The Vikings haven't. And so the Saints practiced at like 7 a.m, my time, Mountain time zone. But the Vikings weren't. So the report that was published by all the beat reporters just showed the Saints with this massive list of injuries, but the Vikings was blank because they haven't reported yet. So it was this weird kind of like offsetting view of both injury reports that I don't think was like a true reflection, because the Vikings have issues too. But we just never saw it in the side-by-side photo. And so that caused the move to 3. I don't know if it holds there. If all these guys miss, of course it'll go up. But this is another interesting one for sure with injuries.
Very interesting. And I was surprised to see Jameis on there as well. Yeah, if Thomas plays, it helps for sure. But got Taysom Hill's a pretty big part of this offense. And I don't like the way they started either. If you look at the turnovers, the Saints are dead last in turnover margin right now. So you can look at that as a good thing for some teams sometimes, like if it's fumble. But when it comes to Jameis Winston, it's a lot of times it's interceptions. So
yeah,
something to think about. This could be a big contest play for people if all these injuries hold and this number comes out still at a 3. So we'll see what happens when that all lines up. Let's move on. Jacksonville versus the Eagles. And this is an interesting spread. It's -6.5 to the Eagles. And I'm a little surprised it's actually got a little juice on it. It was 7 for a touch, and then it came back. But this is like, I mean, you can say this is the Doug Peterson revenge game. But we had the Carson Wentz revenge game that didn't really work out for us last week. And I don't know. I'm going to be honest with you. I did make a play on Jacksonville, and I'm upset that it's going against me. I'm thinking I made a bad timing to the market just because there's money coming in here. But the way I look at it is that, both these quarterbacks, test pretty well, pretty equal in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. If you look at those numbers, if you look at their offensive and defensive EPA, they're both almost equal. Now, you can say Jacksonville's strength of schedule hasn't been that great. And then, I guess Joe Blow might say they lost to the Washington Commanders, and if the Eagles beat them, I don't know how many people still handicap like that. Hopefully not a lot. But in this situation here, I can just see a very motivated Jacksonville team because I believe they do like their coach in this situation. But the question is, I don't trust a lot of my metrics on the Eagles yet, Adam, because the whole second half of their games, they've been in coast mode. They haven't had to do nothing, which has probably hurt some of their stats. But I still liked it at 6.5. My pure number on this, if I was making the book, is 5.5. What are your thoughts on this one?
If it was 5.5, would you take the Eagles?
No. If I was making the book, I would put it at 5.5.
Gotcha. Okay. I don't know if the Eagles piling up all their stats in the first half is a bad thing. I think that shows how good of a team they are.
Exactly.
And I know what you mean, because people will look at the numbers like that and they'll say, well, they didn't have to do anything, and they're just, well, yeah, because they were up 20. So like, that's a team you want to be betting on. The interesting thing here, both of these teams, there's 4 teams so far through 3 weeks that are top 10, both offense and defense, EPA per play 4 and allowed. These are 2 of the 4. I think Jacksonville would surprise a lot of folks being in there. I don't know what to make of this, because both of these teams get bet every single week by pros. Like, they're 2 clear bet on teams. I don't disagree with that in any way. The Eagles quietly, like you mentioned, despite having to coast in the second half, so many of these games, they're second in net yards per play through 3 weeks despite that. And that looks at every play from all 4 quarters in every game. There's no filtering out for garbage time in that. And so that just shows how dominant they've been. But again, you said it well, like, can you trust either of these teams to be as good as they look because of the opponents that they've played, and they're now facing off against each other? I'm having a hard time sorting that out. And where I guess I struggle is at 6.5, I can't look to Jacksonville, but if this was on the other side of 7 at 7.5, I certainly would. And so it's one of those, like, how I don't think there's a substantial edge here either way. Tough.
Right. That's fair. So I guess if this stat is accurate, the Eagles are allowing 5.4 yards per carry, and that's just a very old general stat. 5 yards per rush. If Jacksonville can keep it close and keep the pressure on, maybe there is a rushing advantage there. But no teams have been able to do it yet because they've been in pass mode on the back of their heels, playing against the Eagles while they're coasting. And that's what did scare me, is that the Eagles don't have second half stats. And when that usually happens, that means they're kind of like, for example, one of those Alabama teams where people can't power rate them high enough because their numbers really are lower than what they truly are. All right. Well, I'm going to stay with the 6.5 and kind of, I still like it, but we'll see what happens. Let's move on to Buffalo versus the Baltimore Ravens. And this is at -3 right now, at -105 on DraftKings. The total of this game is high. It's at 51.5. Lots of injuries in the secondary for Buffalo, and the Ravens kind of have injuries, I would say, speckled all over their team a little bit. Some are in the secondary, but definitely your offensive line took a hit. The running backs are always injured. But here's the thing. I made a play on Buffalo, Adam, and I made it at the -3. and it came back down. It actually went up to 4 for a little bit in some books. It was at 3.5 for a while, and it came back down. Now here's my problem. I do see a path to victory for the Ravens. If you even look at next gen stats, the Lamar Jackson is number 2 in intended air yards. And if that's the case, and he's free in that pocket because of the way Buffalo plays defense, and if their cornerbacks are beamed up in their secondary, I could see those deep balls going to Bateman, Duvernay, and even Andrews, and them having a field day against Buffalo's secondary if Lamar doesn't get sacked. Well, Lamar doesn't get sacked. That's my problem with the play I made. I'm not necessarily regretting it. Buffalo's, I guess, in a good spot after doubling Miami's yards and wanting to come back and make a statement. I kind of felt at first that this would be a game similar to what Cincinnati did to Baltimore last year. I think Baltimore is a little fraudulent, minus Lamar Jackson, so that's why I made the play. But I can see the spread coming back against me. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm sitting here listening to what you're saying, but I'm blown away by this tab situation. How do you navigate that? First of all, how many does it tell you how many tabs you have open in the browser?
I probably should have hit the F11 key and did that.
You know how many are open? This is an unbelievable amount of tabs.
I usually have 50 tabs open on each screen. So,
but how do you know which is which? You can't even see the words on that.
I'm used to it, man. This is covers. I mean, this is Sure Dog for UFC. We got team rankings right here. I'm very used to it, Adam. I guess when you sit in front of a computer all day, it's almost like you can almost do it while you're blind.
Incredible. That's really threw me off. Who do you think is better, Miami or Baltimore?
Miami or Baltimore?
Yeah.
Miami.
Okay. So the Bills on the road at Miami closed 5 last week. They're now 3 on the road in Baltimore. So there's the whole viewpoint of why when this got up higher, maybe there was a lot of disagreement with that. But there's a difference in power ratings, I think, of how people are treating the Dolphins and the Ravens and who's believing what, because you're essentially saying that this line versus last week, where the injuries for the Bills are essentially similar in both cases, even with the Bills' loss, this is still saying that the Ravens are 2 points better than the Dolphins. And so there's that initial move on Buffalo, I think, was disagreement with that being the case.
Yes.
And that's really the extent of what we're looking at. The one thing I would say here from a matchup perspective, Lamar has been the MVP in my mind through 3 weeks so far in the league. You're probably putting Allen second. But Lamar's done a lot of his damage against teams blitzing him. The Bills showed in week 1 against the Rams, they don't need to blitz to play effective defense. The ideal game plan for Buffalo would be to not blitz Lamar and sit back. But now with the injury situation, are they going to be able to do that? Because that kind of goes back and forth in that perspective, where it's like this is a defense that could, but can they now with so many names on the injuries? This is a good question. How many points are you giving the injuries to Bill have? I'll do the host part of this, asking the question here, because I saw it. I don't know, because they play so much zone defense and so much of it is coaching based and scheme based that it's not really like a situation where you're missing that one shutdown corner in a system that's playing a lot of man or man in front of cover 2 or any, like, it's so team based that they kind of are able to disperse that responsibility. And so they almost negate that. I think pricing the Bills' defensive injuries is a very difficult thing to do.
I do too.
I know who bet the Bills. You bet them as well. There was a very sharp group that bet them Monday morning. That pushed it to 4.5. There was a very sharp group that took the 4.5. It's like we're locked in this range. I'm kind of surprised it got back to the flat 3. Tough one. Again, this is a brutal week. You had me on a tough week here.
I know. That's why I had to bring in the big guns, Adam. I would say the answer to that question is hard because, like you said, the Bills get to the quarterback, which relieves pressure off of their secondary anyway. I mean, I've seen the Ravens do that for years by living off their blitz, and you never really know how good the secondary is if it's getting past 3 seconds and the quarterback gets open. And then Patrick Mahomes kind of came in there and showed them how bad they were a couple different times too. So it's a tough question. I think the Bills will get to Lamar. I think they're smart enough to contain him and take out the middle of the field. So I'm going to stand by this play. But it is just so fascinating talking about this situation. And I would not bet the under in this game. It's over the key number of 51 by a half point for a reason. And I still would not even come close to that.
I'd be opposite there where I wouldn't want any part of the over. But I don't think the total's that far off. But with the Bills, I truly believe last week was kind of planned on their part to slow things down as much as they did to protect that secondary, not knowing sort of what it might look like. I think it's a similar situation here.
They did sign Xavier Rhodes. We'll see if he has anything left in the tank. I'd be surprised if they throw him out to the dogs this early.
Game.
But there you go. Here's another tough game. It's the Seahawks versus the I'm going to pass. It's 4.5. I'm passing here. The Lions have too many injuries right now, and the Seahawks have a really beat up secondary. And I don't like their quarterback. To be honest with you, it's like I was like thinking, kind of liking the Lions when it was 5.5, then it went down to 5, and I'm like, why do I like the Lions if the market's going against me? And so I'm going to pass, and you're welcome to pass if you want.
Seahawks are nothing, but that's not a endorsement of betting the Seahawks. I'm not laying 5 with the Lions. It's not happening. The Seahawks probably have the worst defense in football. The Lions are not that far ahead, and so to lay a number with that team is tough when it's this big.
All right, well, here's a much better game: the Commanders versus the Cowboys. Thank God this is
the one to talk about.
I was at a kids party. One of my friends' 2-year-olds on Monday night, and it was at Chuck E. Cheese, which didn't have TVs. And I kind of told him, it's like, next time you have a kid party, go to Peter Piper. They got the Monday Night Football on. But at the same time, I wasn't really missing the fact that this Cowboys Giants game was happening, because it was a pretty ugly game to watch, especially in the first half. But to be honest with you, that's kind of what I think about both of these teams. I think the Commanders are an absolute mess. And they are very injured now too. But at what point are they sitting there at 0-3? And what point do they have to have that big game coming in? The Cowboys are laying a little bit of juice, -3, -115 total, ugly at 42.5.
I don't know if they have to have a good game. This is a terrible team, especially on defense. People might listen to this and say, "Oh, the Commanders in the pass rush." And no, this is a bottom 5 defense through and through. They're not stopping anybody. My struggle here is I would love to bet against Washington any way that I can. I don't know if I want to be laying more than the field goal with the Cowboys. Now, they are going to be getting back Michael Gallup, I would expect, for this game. He was very close to going last week. You'll probably get 30 to 35 snaps from him. Dalton Schultz, still an unknown, but I like what I'm seeing from Rush so far, being very decisive, getting the ball out, willing to push it downfield. Now, again, though, it's just at the price point that it's at. Like, if this is less than a field goal, I'm thrilled to take the Cowboys. I probably need to be comfortable betting Washington. I mean, you're going to need 4.5, 5, but if you're laying 3.5 with the Cowboys at home, you're not getting that big of an edge either way. So it's another one of these games where it's unfortunately kind of been adjusted into the right spot. Dallas are nothing for me at this number, but it's awfully thin at this point where it is at 3.5.
The more I look at this injuries, and this is just the ESPN report, we have to remember that Chase Young's been out anyway. So they're already down one big guy before the season even started. Look at this. You got their second string guys are out, Mathis has been out on injured reserve. This tells me that the Cowboys should run all over this team. That almost makes me like them at the 3, right?
Washington is a horrible football team. They're not Seattle or Chicago bad, but they're close.
I don't know, man. They are getting close with that injured list too. And maybe instead of the Commanders, they should have just added the Washington horrible football team, just like you said. We'll leave it like that.
If it was 4, would you take Washington?
No, I would not.
5? How high do you have to go?
6.5.
Okay, so it's a Dallas or nothing type of game.
Yeah, and when this report comes through, I will probably. Well, I'd have to be pretty quick to the market here. I'll probably play Dallas, but we'll see if I can get some information earlier. And obviously, it could be a contest play if nothing else. If let's say it goes to 3.5, 4, you didn't get it in time, you might still be lucky enough to get a 3. But I'd be shocked if the contest even keep it at 3. I think they're going to move it up to
2. Vince Vegas, why is the line not 7? It can't be 7 because everyone would be betting on Washington. And also, yes, they're at home, but home field in Dallas is not worth 4.5 points. So I think that's a pretty clear answer. And let's not forget that this is a Cowboys team starting a backup quarterback, missing their arguably best wide receiver. And yeah, it can't ever be 7.
Yeah, because they got some tall receivers, and you at least have a quote unquote starting quarterback with Wentz. I mean, Dotson's fantastic. McClellan's very good. Who's the other guy? Samuel. So they still skill there. It's just, going against the second string. There's no way. If it was 7, I'd be all over
If you started a franchise today and your choices at QB were Cooper Rush or Carson Wentz, who would you pick?
Whoever I can pay less.
But money's not an option. Who do you pick on the spot?
You pick Carson Wentz, but it's funny because Cooper Rush is not. He's got a nice little home in Dallas. He's got something going for him. I don't think he's going anywhere farther.
Okay, and then if you had to pick a head coach, Mike McCarthy or Ron Rivera, who do you pick?
Ron Rivera all day.
Okay, so but as we talked this out, you're skewing coach and QB towards Washington, and then I think you like Washington skill guys better.
Yes, but their defensive line won't be on the field. Washington will have like 23 minutes of possession based upon the fact that their defensive line is nothing, and all they need to do is run it to Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott all day. It's a complete matchup situation for me.
So that doesn't sound like a recipe to cover a 3.5 point spread.
No. It could cover 3. I mean, if you're talking the Dallas side, I think it can cover all the way up to 6 possibly. And obviously these injuries have to hold. What about you?
Again, like I can't bet Washington at this number, but laying it with Dallas seems like it's a tricky one. Again, Dallas or nothing, but there's not enough here to really get me comfortable with Dallas at 3.5.
Hey, that's fair. That's fair enough. Let's move on to the Chargers versus the Texans. And the Texans are plus 5.5 at home now. This was 4.5 for a little bit. Some Charger money came in. I think it's because of their receiver is supposed to play now, Adam, right?
Keenan Allen should be on the field, yeah.
Yeah, I think that move might have been based upon that. You can tell me more. But they also lost Joey Bosa and they lost Rashawn Slater, maybe their best offensive lineman. Betting on the Chargers on the road is straight ugly, but yet I don't like Lovie Smith. It made me stay away from betting the Texans last week. I was considering making a play on the Texans. I'm glad I didn't. The Texans are better than the Bears on my power ratings, but not by much. But going into this game, the Chargers have the ability and they have a lot of talent. Can they make up for the big injury there? And how healthy is Herbert? Because my whole play on Jacksonville plus 7 last week was based upon a free roll that Herbert wasn't that healthy. Well, he played last week. He made some long passes, but he wasn't exactly taking off running the ball, and he didn't look all that healthy to me. So I'm going to lean the Texans and see what you got to go with this one.
The Chargers have a QB that can't comfortably take a deep breath. They're without their best center. They're without one of their best offensive linemen. Their best wide receiver is questionable. Their best pass rusher is going to be out, and they're missing their best cornerback. And now they're laying 5 on the road against Houston, who might be the worst team in football. Pass.
Pass. It's 5.5 for a reason here.
I don't. 7 was probably too high, and I get it, but nobody was betting 7 because they feel like the rating was off. They were betting 7 because they were concerned that the injuries were going to be worse than they were. And now, as they get slightly better, we're seeing this number go back the other way. It's not going to get back to 7 unless there's just a huge change of health and fortune for the Chargers. But at this point, good luck making a case at this number.
Yeah, good luck. Absolutely. I'm not going to make any move right now on this, and probably be off the game by Sunday anyway. Titans versus the Colts, and the Colts are laying -3 right here at -115. The total is 42.5. The Titans have done well against the Colts in the past. I am more down on the Titans than I even was last year, and I think I don't even think the Titans got in my top 8 or 9 teams last year. The Colts, for some reason, weren't gelling right away. And then all of a sudden, last game, they did what they had to do to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. But let's face it, Kansas City should have won that game. They were missing field goals. There's just look bad efficiency. I think the Colts were very fortunate. And I'm really wondering what's going on with Matt Ryan. He looks like the Carson Wentz on the Colts last year to me right now. And I mean, if Darius Leonard is back, and I know this for a fact, Adam, I think I would lean the Colts, if not play them. What are your thoughts?
These aren't getting easier as we go.
They're not.
So we came on the air and Taylor got put on the injury report with a toe injury that was never reported and mispracticed today. Is that a toe injury giving him a day off, or is that a toe injury that's actually a toe injury? Quite honestly, I haven't had the time because we've been on air to look to see what the truth is. If he's out, this offense is working without a clue right now, which goes completely against everything I thought this team would be. I want no part of the Titans. But we're in this spot again. This is just like the Washington-Dallas game. I want no part of betting on Washington, but I want no part of betting on Tennessee. But at this number, it's probably right at 3.5. I'm becoming the most boring podcast guest of all time, but this is probably the right price.
Don't worry, you're not. I mentioned even before this that there's just so much stuff up in the air, but what we're doing is just kind of showing people how we try to discern things. So I think that's very valuable.
Let's look at this one. If it's 4.5, I think we're both probably saying, well, the Colts haven't done anything. They should have lost last week. They still have a lot of injury concerns. And now Taylor's on the injury report. Maybe we should look at the Titans. And then the flip side, if it was at 3, we're probably saying, well, the Colts could get Leonard back, and the Colts have Taylor on the injury report, but he could start. And this team was way better than we thought coming in. Why haven't they shown up? Now it's a big game they have to win. Let's take the Colts at 3. Now it's at 3.5, and it's probably the right number.
Yeah, and Tennessee's beat up too. Bud Dupree, Ola Adeniji, is that how you say his name? He's out with the linebacker there.
The crippling injury for them was Landry at the start of the year.
Yes, exactly. So I agree. This is ugly, and it's hard to lay points with the Colts too right now. And with Matt Ryan hasn't showed me enough yet. Probably a pretty solid line here. And someone asking a must-win for the Chargers. I hate using the word must-win. I think if they want to keep the media off them, you win this game, But I mean, they should approach every game like they need to win it, especially against the Texans. I think the Texans could say it's a must-win too, right, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, there's some situational truth to that for LA, but this is it's big for both sides for sure.
All right, let's move on to the next game. Then, and we have here's another great one for you.
I know where you're going. Giants Bears.
Yes, Giants Bears, baby. Oh,
I can do this in 5 seconds.
Do it.
Leonard Williams is huge because the Bears have given up on passing. They're running more than any team we've seen in years. If he's not in, we saw what the Cowboys did. The Bears can run. It's Giants or nothing, depending on the report. But can you lay more in the field goal with the Giants? It's just like Washington Dallas, and just like Tennessee, Indy. Nobody should be running to bet the Bears, but the Giants are like the one of the few teams you don't want to bet on laying a price.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. And you helped me over the fence with the simple handicap last week on the over in the Bears-Texans game. Now, it took a while. It was trending much more over the first half, then all of a sudden it got a little dicey coming in the second half. But I agreed with it because I don't think the Bears defense is any good. They can't stop the run. They're not good against the pass either. I see the Giants possibly getting Kadarius Toney back, but if the Bears are going to be able to put yards in, I look at Justin Fields as a very erratic quarterback. Like, he's going to throw a pick six here and there just trying to make a play. So if you like the Bears versus the Texans over last week, why wouldn't you like the Bears versus the Giants over at close to the same number, 39.5 right
here? I can't make a case. I'm not betting the under. The reason I really liked that game last week was because the schedule both ways kind of worked in favor of the Houston offense being a little bit suppressed. And then the Bears defense, they were bailed out by weather, which could have made things look a lot worse. And then I don't think that the Packers' pace necessarily reflected how many points could be put up on this team. And even the Texans last week, they had the pick in the end zone. They had another stalled drive. That 20 could have looked a little bit bigger as well. So, again, over or nothing, but nothing I've bet yet. But this would be one I certainly have circled.
Yeah, I took the over 38.5. It's at 39.5. It's just one of those situations where I think there's going to be desperation at the end. The Giants offense looked bad, or pretty bad at least, against a very good, a good Cowboys defense. This is a good defense, and they're kind of relying on their defense now. I also think the Giants are a little bit banged up. I believe in their secondary.
Williams injury is significant. If he's in, that really hinders the Bears offense.
Yeah, in Aaron Robinson, Justin Lane, Nick McLeod, all corners that are all questionable. I'm kind of hoping one of them maybe doesn't make it in, but that's kind of my case that I'm going to make for the over, and it did move in my direction, at least for my initial number, but all podcasts are based upon the current numbers that they're offered. So I'm going to still like the over to 41, I think, in this situation. Let's move on to another wonderful game, the Jets versus the Steelers. I almost feel like I'm screwing everybody here. The Jets and the Steelers. The Steelers are 3.5 points right here, flat minus 110. Ugly old total of 42. Now I'll tell you this: I almost bet the Jets, Adam. I'm thinking this is gonna go to 3. I came in with hopes on Mitch, but he has showed me that he still can't check down worth a crap. He looks like he slowed down a little bit, even when he tried to escape the pocket a couple times. The Jets have to do something here. Now, you said there's some Zach Wilson news that he might be playing this game, so I'm going to let you have at it.
Yeah, Wilson will start for the Jets. So he says he's 100% and he'll be ready to go. So there's no more Flacco. This is, again, it's tough. Jets have played the Ravens, the Browns, and the Bengals. Every game so far has been against this division. They now wrap it off with the Steelers. Every team within the North has a relatively decent defense. This is probably going to be no exception. And so I think to some extent, the Jets offense could look better with Wilson. I don't know how big the immediate jump is because it's not like this is going to be an easy scheme for him to play against. So I think it definitely has to come off of the 3.5. That's a big number to be laying for the Steelers. But at the same time, it's kind of a drop down in weight class, so to speak, for the Steelers as well. When you think about the games that they've played against the Bengals week 1, the Pats week 2, and the Browns week 3. So there's a lot of crossover here that you can kind of look at. Like, they haven't played. This will be the easiest defense they've faced all season by far. So maybe the Steelers all of a sudden look a little bit better too. So again, it's a tough one. There's nothing here that I'm jumping out to me either one way or the other. I think the price is right.
Yeah, their offensive line's so bad without George Fant and Dwayne Brown, and of course the Mekhi Becton injury early.
Jets generate no pressure. So it's like, where
Yeah.
is finally the Steelers breakout offense game? It's a tough one.
Yeah, it is a tough one. No, good stuff. Let's move on to the next game. Then we have the Cleveland Browns versus the Atlanta Falcons. Now, this is a little bit better of a game, I think, maybe just a little bit. I know it's the Browns, but I actually been somewhat impressed by what the Browns have done, even though their strength of schedule has been pretty easy. They're laying -1, and it looks like this line has been moving towards the Atlanta Falcons here. I'm a little surprised by that. I mean, they played. So when they played the Rams had them dead nuts in the water, and then a couple crazy fluke plays that get back into the game. Then it took their star cornerback not Revis. I forgot his name. Rams cornerback.
I'm gonna make you struggle to pull the name out of the back of your mind here, because I know exactly who you're talking about.
Right, but he made that play at the end zone.
Ramsey.
I
was making you sweat there a little bit.
I gotta think old Roman. Ramsey. Okay. Well, anyways, he played like a gladiator that game and got that interception and stopped the Falcons from winning. But I thought the Falcons were fraudulent there. And then I was on the Falcons teaser against the Seahawks because I really think the Seahawks are one of the worst 3 teams in the league. And I think the Falcons have some life, but it's Mariota here. But the line moved towards the Falcons. What's wrong with the Browns? Is it their strength of schedule that people hate? Is it still Jacoby Brissett that's kind of proven that he's done pretty well? I'm going to give you a strong lean to the Browns until I hear your piece.
I'll throw 6 teams at you: Miami, Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Jacksonville. Would you say that those are good teams or bad teams?
I'll definitely say they're great teams, almost minus the Jacksonville. Maybe I'm not sure about them yet, but
so the Falcons are right in that group for offensive production through 3 weeks on a per play basis. So that's how sneaky good this Atlanta offense has been. Where this becomes tricky is guess who's team number 8 in that category? The Cleveland Browns.
Cleveland Browns.
There you go. You look at a net yards per play, very important stat. Both of these teams dead even in that regard. So you have these 2 sneaky offenses playing against each other that I don't think the perception overall matches just how good they've been. You have 2 teams sort of dead even in net yards per play. What do we have the point spread at? 1 point favorite are the Cleveland Browns, and the over has been bet up 4.5 points by this time of the week. Again, it's another situation where kind of everything that you would think is the advantage to take from how these 2 teams have played has been entirely priced into this market. It's a brutal week. Nothing. It's just I wish it was standing out. If this is not on the a 1 or a pick'em, I mean there's a clear side to take, whoever's getting the points. But here we are with it priced right, and then it's like, okay, well, why don't you bet the over? Well, it's moved 4.5 points, and we're now looking at this game as the second highest total on the board. And it's almost to the point where, like you said, it's Mariota versus Brissett. And we're looking at nearly a 50-point total, which is right comparable to Lamar versus Allen, which is a 1.5 higher. And so, yeah, tough one.
Well, here's the thing. What I will say about Atlanta versus the Rams played a massive cover 2 when they're up. And that's why you saw Arizona drive down the field 2 or 3 times at the end. I'm sitting there holding my Rams -3.5. I was one of the few on that side, but I was always holding my fingers because I knew they're in cover 2, and I knew that they would have to tighten up when it came down. Well, they did the same thing against the Falcons, but it just kind of bit them a little bit more.
Sure.
So I think a lot of these yards are fake. I think a lot of these Falcons situational yards are against the Saints at home. The Saints have not showed to be all that good themselves on defense or offense. And then obviously against one of the worst teams in the league, against Seattle. I thought they should have even done better against Seattle's secondary. So I'm really strongly in the Browns here. So
I don't entirely agree with that, but what I will say is, of the 2 performances so far on both of these teams, I would probably lean towards the Browns being more sustainable, or more real. I would say I'd lean that way, but I wouldn't discount what the Falcons have done offensively.
No, fair enough. Vince says over. I wouldn't go over in this game. I would
Well, I would have went over Sunday night, but
Yeah, right.
we're long gone there. Yeah.
Yeah, long gone. Let's move on to the Cardinals versus the Panthers. The Panthers are sitting at a short favorite here, -1.5. Book's not really protecting their teasers, at least DraftKings isn't. A lot of offshore we do, but you could tease this game being such a low total under 443. My thoughts on this one, I think that Cardinals are just Kyler Murray and just a bunch of garbage, almost and JJ Watt, but they lost a lot. Zayvon Collins is injured now. The Panthers, Baker Mayfield is the only quarterback that ranks lower than Justin Fields for EPA and completion percentage over expectation. It just blows my mind how bad he's looked. Ugly game, probably a teaser. Anything on this one?
If it was 3 for the Panthers, would you back the Cardinals?
If it was 3 for the Panthers, -3, would I back the Cardinals?
Yeah.
Probably. It wouldn't be an easy bet, but probably.
If this was a pick 'em, are you in on the Panthers?
Not right now.
Okay. This is how the week's going. I will say I don't know how bad the Cardinals are. If we're gonna give them a break, they played the Chiefs with nobody. They were as injured of a team. We talked about teams with injuries. That week 1 game against Kansas City, that was as injured of a team both sides as we'll see all season. Like the Cardinals were decimated. They weren't much better health-wise the next week against the Raiders, and they, by all means, should have lost that game a couple different ways. They end up winning an OT, so you kind of get like the break there. And then they played the Rams, who we kind of think are one of the better 7 to 8 teams in the NFL. So they played the Chiefs, which are a top 3 team. They played the Rams, who are a top 7 to 8 team. I think is a widely consensus agreement. And then they played the Raiders. I'm having trouble pricing the Raiders. That's probably still an average team. Now there's a big drop-off to quality of opponent in playing the Panthers, who have looked horrible. And as you mentioned, have a quarterback in Mayfield that's significantly worse. And so this is their easiest opponent all the way around this year. This is their easiest quarterback they've faced. This is their easiest group of receivers and skill players they've faced. So there's definitely that working in their favor. Hate to keep going back to this, but the number's probably right.
Let's hype up the game a little bit. This is the Oklahoma Sooner Lincoln Riley challenge with Kyler Murray versus Baker Mayfield.
Good call there.
You go. There you go.
Good eye.
Got something right for the networks to use right there, my man.
Yep.
Let's move into the Patriots versus the Packers. We already touched on the Patriots versus the Packers. I have nothing more to say. It's 9.5 though, so I will say it is moving back down a little bit here. I just think that I would probably still play the Packers at 9.5. I did grab them at 8.5, knowing the line was going to move, but apparently a lot of people agreed with what you said there. This was 10.5, and this moved back down. And people say, yes, the Patriots are better than the Bears. We are going to move this line down. We're going to hit it at 10.5, 10, and all the way down to 9.5. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think we summed it up well.
All right, let's move on to Denver Broncos versus the Raiders. The Raiders are -2.5, and the total is 45.5. The Raiders 0-3. I know that McDaniels had a meeting with the team, or with the owner, probably with the team multiple times. I mean, I can't imagine them having no effort here, but at the same time, the Denver Broncos are more talented than the Ravens than the Raiders, and I believe they have the better quarterback in Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's been a little Jekyll and Hyde with me. I teased the Broncos already with another team, so that's where I stop. I think that this is going to be a close game. What are your thoughts?
I mean, this is becoming an all-time low appearance. How can the number be anything else than what it is? The situation for the Raiders is as big of a play-up spot as you're going to get. This is the entirety of their season on the line. This is it's probably, for McDaniels, the turning point on whether or not he stays coach long team, because you drop to 0-4. The Raiders within that division and how their schedule plays out are going to just be in a battle to get anywhere close to 500 with that offensive talent. It's going to be tough. The Broncos lose a key piece in the middle of their defensive line, so potentially the weakness of the Raiders to date as their O-line gets a little bit of a reprieve here. But I don't know what the Broncos are at this point whatsoever. I do confidence ratings every week for the offensive and the defensive units. I have the lowest I can rate the confidence on both sides because I still think that with the talent, this offense could be well above average. Right now, it's playing to one of the lowest levels in the league, which I don't think is true either. And then defensively, it's incredibly erratic. Brutal game here in terms of betting.
Brutal game. This feels like that Eagles game from last year when they went into Vegas and they weren't even in the game. Vegas beat the heck out of them. It's like you never know what you're going to get from the Raiders. They are my crutch, and I got to stay away from them. I did very high variance team for me. I don't mind teasing the other side going past the key numbers, but that's where I'm going to stand. Chiefs versus Buccaneers. Another massively injured team. So the Bucs had cluster injuries on their offensive line as well as the receivers, a little bit on defense. The Chiefs, very weird team. It's without Tyreek Hill, they show up really good one week, and then last week their kicker is out, their main kicker, and then they just had to fire the next guy. So usually in these situations when the kicker's bad, they're going to go for it on fourth a lot, which makes you wonder. It almost makes you push you towards the over when that happens. You can give up good field position or you're going to score a touchdown. It's kind of interesting the way you approach this game. I think that Tampa was a teaser leg if you can get them at the +1.5, but another situation, Adam, where you're probably not going to have a great opinion.
So it's actually, I think we think about Kansas City in such a weird way because the expectations are always so high that even through 3 weeks, when they rank number 2 in offensive EPA per play, they're number 3 in net yards per play. Their success rate for offensive plays down to down ranks only behind the Miami Dolphins. Where like everything's broken with this team, nothing works. And then they're like second or third in the league. Last year, they finished number 1 in yards per drive, points per drive. They did everything right. But the general viewer is going to say that they had a really bad year offensively because just the expectations don't match what we're seeing because of how different defenses are playing them. The one thing that I would say really stands out to me from the Chiefs so far is up front in the front 7, and we never talk about the Chiefs defense, has been as good as any team in the league through 3 weeks. They have been incredible up front. When we think about the weakness of the Buccaneers right now, it is the offensive line. They're down to their third string left tackle, their second string center. It's beat up across the board. It's like the Chiefs' advantage in this game is their defense against this Tampa Bay offensive front. Now, it's probably going to look a little bit different for the Bucs because to me, what they did in the first half against the Cowboys before the injuries in that game started mounting, and then, of course, there was the suspension to Evans. Julio hasn't played since. Gage has been in and out. They've had a mess of injuries. Everything this week points to all of the skill guys being back on the field. And so, to me, what I saw the Bucs do the first half in the opener against the Cowboys was really impressive because Brady gets the ball out so quick, but they have so many of these skill guys with so much speed. Like the scheme that they had was really good. So, yeah, the Chiefs are going to have a big pass rush advantage, but if there's a QB and a scheme that you want to bet to negate that pass rush, it's probably Brady and these guys, along with maybe 1 or 2 other teams in the league that you would rank in that spot. So an interesting back and forth here. Again, it's probably priced right. No real difference in what I'm seeing between where I'd make it and what this number is. The Bucs have taken money all week, slowly but surely. I think that's probably indicative of how competitive this game will be.
Yeah, that's definitely telling. And maybe when these lines turn out right, when the injury report's all said and done, some of these teasers might be the best move past the key numbers.
I would be Bucs or nothing, I think, at this point.
Yeah, me too. And the Bucs have a great home field advantage, in my opinion. It's higher than others, and I don't rate home field as much as people used to, obviously. But I still think the Brady effect definitely helps. And I agree. I like Chaz Malusi. He came from the Badgers. He's a linebacker for the Chiefs. I think he was fantastic last year in college. Looks to be doing pretty well with the Chiefs right now. Very, very interesting game. It's going to be a fun game to watch finally, at least. I think we're going to have
Very good. Yep.
A very good Sunday night game here. Well, that ends it.
Slate all around.
Good primetime slate, and that ends it with a primetime game. The Rams versus the Niners, and this is -1.5 for the Niners, total 42. This is funny. This thing was started out low. I hit the Niners. I know other people did, and it went to, I think, 3. And then now it's back down. You got some Rams bettors here. And what I do know about this is, part of the reason I play it is that I believe the Niners have the Rams number. I think the Niners almost have to win this game to get back in it. They have that stinky Bears loss in a monsoon in Chicago. And, they really outgained the Bears. It was just very Trey Lancey. One thing that I noticed last week is Jimmy Garoppolo was rusty, and he should have been rusty. They kept him out the whole summer trying to trade him. They didn't want him to get hurt. He didn't get practice, came kind of late, but maybe he gets it together this week. I think the Rams are maybe a little bit in hangover mode. I feel like Shanahan owns this matchup, but the Rams are still very talented, yet Stafford, I don't completely trust him. I love the way the Niners match up. They're pretty hard hitting in the trenches, minus Aaron Donald, but now the Niners lost Trent Williams on the left tackle side, so that concerns me a little bit, and I wonder if that's part of the reason this thing moved down. I think the Rams are a great teaser leg at +1.5. Even though I did play the Niners, and I think this is a get-right game for them. What are your thoughts on this one?
Do you think that Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan are decent offensive coaches?
Better than that.
Okay. Do you think that Matthew Stafford is an above-average quarterback?
Yes, he certainly is.
Jimmy Garoppolo?
When he's doing well, yes. When he's not rusty, he was number 4 last year in EPA plus CPOE, so I think he is above average.
So pretty good numbers. And then if I was just generally to say Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, like kind of above average offensive players or below average?
Above average.
Okay. So the total in this game is 41. Now, I'm not going to ask you the same questions, but let's look at some other 41.5s on the board. Cooper Rush versus Carson Wentz. That's probably a step down from the offensive talent that we just spoke about. Brian Hoyer versus Aaron Rodgers. So one side of it, pretty good. The other side, probably a pretty steep down from where we're at. And then there's one more on the board, which is Zach Wilson versus Mitchell Trubisky, which is also at 41.5. So I would say that's probably a significant step down. So to me, what stands out here is I see this total. I'm like, can this game with these offensive coaches, with these quarterbacks, with these skill position players, are we really saying that these defenses are as good to make this game the same total as Trubisky versus Wilson and Wentz versus Rush? Like, is that where we're at with this number? Because that's what the market is saying. I don't know if I buy that entirely.
Wow, so it looks like you're really pushing this over here and selling it to me. I'm kind of biting, but
what's the other side to this? Like
that these coaches know each other that well. That's the side to it that keeps it down, I think. And I'm not saying I agree with that, but I think that's why you're seeing 42 right now. Is there weather going on in San Fran? I didn't really look at that, but I thought that this would have been a 45.5 point total based upon previous.
I wish I had the past numbers available for like these teams and matchups, because I can't, on the top of my head, I feel like it's always skewed over, but that could be a complete misjudgment on my part. I don't know. I wish I had numbers on that, but that's something to check after. That's a good point.
Yeah.
A ton of familiarity, and let's not discount how good both of these defenses could be. But like at the same time, and so you mentioned it well, the Falcons kind of got a lot going their way against the Rams, blocked field goal return. stuff like that. But like the Falcons put up 20 something. The Bills hung, what was it, 38 in week 1 last week. Then again, the 49ers defense, they had the rain game against Chicago. That's a really bad offense. They had the rain game against Seattle. That's a really bad offense. And then they played the Broncos, which I don't know what we think of Denver, but that could also be a very bad offense. There's a lot of low confidence there. So the Rams, probably the best offense the Niners have faced by a considerable margin too. So I don't know. It goes a couple ways here.
Well, Aziz Al-Shaair is out for the Niners, and that's another big thing that goes towards the over. He's a massive part of the linebacking crew here, right?
Again, it's kind of more of a scheme thing. So I don't know if I'm rating it that high.
Okay. All right. Well, I suppose the left tackle in that is interesting. Maybe it's Jimmy Garoppolo's performance too that's keeping it low, but
we just saw an 11-10 final, like 72 hours ago. So that doesn't help anything.
I could see myself buying this over. I could see myself doing it.
It jumps out to me. We're going through everything, and I'm like, it's all kind of lining up and what have you to being very tough. But I see that versus the other games that are at this price point. It doesn't jive for me. But this number's crashed down. So there's clearly influence behind this move to the under, but has it gone too far?
Well, that's a good segue into, Adam, where could we find out if and when you are taking this over and try to get to this number before everybody else?
I'll post it in the Telegram channel. That's where I send out all the bets and the write-ups, and anyone can join that through the Twitter account. So we'll see what happens as the week progresses. As quiet of an NFL betting week as I've had in a long time. But it's tough because, like, if I'm looking at sort of what I want to do and team-wise or where my opinions are on who's over or undervalued, like I think the Bears are worse than they're getting credit for. They're playing the Giants, who are a team that I think is getting too much credit. So, like, that's a bad spot number-wise. I think the Houston Texans are a really bad team, but they're playing the Chargers, who have 100 injuries on both sides. So that's brutal. I think the Lions are a terrible defense that's very overvalued. If I want to bet against that, I have to bet on Geno. So, like, that's a bad situation. I think the Eagles are very good, but I also think the Jags are very good. And so I don't want to get involved there. I think Washington's horrible. Well, now I have to lay 3.5 with Cooper Rush. It's just endless this week for how, if it's any other, like if the games fall any other way, I'm looking at like 6 or 7 strong opinions. Right now I'm at 0 because of the matchups and the prices.
Yeah,
so,
and it's not always going to be like that, and we're going to find better weeks to have you on and give the public a better idea. But at least what we're doing is sometimes it's better to talk people off of bad bets than it is to give out a winner because you're paying juice. So,
I think I did a good job of that on almost every game.
We both did, man. Hurricane concerns for the Panthers? I'd say so. But I mean, sure, they could linger around there. I'm not going to make any move on that game for now. I think coming later, there could be on Sunday where Adam even comes on the Simple Handicap or on his Telegram channel where he starts spitting out some plays, and it might not be till Sunday right before the game.
The injury concern of note is the Bucs, who had to go to Miami, so they're already out of Tampa, scheduled to potentially go back. They said there's no plans to move that game now, as the hurricane went south of Tampa. It'll still be an impact, but probably not as much as anticipated. If there's a change to that, they're going to play it in Minnesota. So if you're looking at the Chiefs-Bucs total, could go from the outdoor situation at Raymond James to an indoor situation on a fast track on a neutral in Minnesota, which would have an impact on this number too.
Yeah, it certainly will. I think people do give credence to the Bucs right there at home. Moving on to a different location is a big thing.
Yep.
All right, Adam, we're out of time, my man. Thank you so much for coming on the show, breaking down as much as we could in the NFL this week. I wish that we could obviously have a show right before the games and have all the information, but it's we got to talk during the week. But it's always a pleasure to have you on, to pick your brain and to learn everything that you do on a weekly basis. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for letting me stop by. To have me on again later in the season, we'll have a little more conviction on a lot of these.
We most certainly will.